talk first. I'm just going to point it at that to start with.
Okay, I think that we're going live right now. So welcome everybody. Sharon Thornton here today with Free Spirit Fabrics and our Inspired By series. Really excited about today's episode. We are here today with Kathy Doughty. She is one of the Free Spirit fabric designers. And it's the first time we've done it with a fabric designer. So Kathy's our first launch with that. So I'm really excited about that. And Kathy also owns a quilt shop in Australia called Material Obsession. So we are here with Kathy. Her most recent collection is actually behind me. It's a quilt called New Vintage. The quilt is called Parla Azur quilt. It was designed by Kathy, and it is in her most recent collection that shipped this past April to quilt stores. So if you're interested in looking for this collection, reach out to your local quilt shop, see if they have the collection, and ask them for it. It's a beautiful collection. I don't know how well you can see the quilt behind me, and I'm sure Kathy will be showing us some more close-ups of the collection. And there will be, if you're tuning in, please send us hearts, send us thumbs up so that we know that you're viewing. And please know that if you've tuned in later, that you can go back and view this video afterwards. You can see it. It will be posted on our Facebook page. It will be on Instagram, and it will be on YouTube. So I would like to welcome Kathy Doughty. She's going to take over the camera now for a little bit until I jump back in. And I'd also like to thank her husband, John, who's the man behind the lens. So welcome to you both. It's 6:30 tonight on the East Coast, and I know it's 8:30 in the morning in Australia. So thank you for getting up. And Kathy, we're going to switch over to you.
Hi. Welcome to my studio this morning. And just to get the record straight, I want to let you know that I have absolutely no idea what's happening out there. I can't hear Sharon, I can't hear you, and I'm actually facing probably the person least interested in anything I have to say in the world, which would be my husband, John. So just give me a minute to get sort of like, on track with this. So I was really happy when Free Spirit invited me to be part of their Inspired by Free Spirit series of Facebook Lives, because actually I've always been inspired by Free Spirit. And I think that that company, more than anything, any other single factor in my quilting career, has created the direction in which I've always followed with my quilts. As many of you probably already know, I'm a self-taught quilter. I used to drag my 3 little boys to the library and take books out when I discovered quilting to figure out what I wanted to do. So I've always looked at pictures of quilts and then figured out how to make them. And then one day, my sister-in-law called me up and said, "You need to get this book," which was Patchwork by Kay Fassett. I can say without a shadow of a doubt that I've made almost every single quilt in this book over the years. It was revolutionary in its time because it was showing us quilts that were, well, as the cover would show you, filled with color and a really strong geometry. So this very much appealed to me because as a quilter, I trust the traditional designs that our quilting sisters gave us from the past. So I like to look at traditional quilts, understand the shapes and the lines that are created in those quilts, and then apply some sort of fabric to that to bring them to life. So when I saw this, I got really excited because the colors were really clean, they were really bright, they seemed to really reflect the kind of environment that I had around me living here in Australia, bright, colorful gardens and lots of flowers. And it came to be a sort of an important basis for what was going to happen when I started Material Obsession in 2003. A quilt like this that Kay very simply structured with a 9-patch and a colorful square, well, my customers loved that. The people that were attracted to Material Obsession in the beginning were often beginning quilters, or they were traditional quilters that had run the gamut of traditional designs, and they were looking for something fresh and different. So for many, many years, I would walk into the shop, pick what I would call an inspiration fabric that had lots of colors and big graphics, and then go through the shop and pull out combinations of fabrics that would actually sit very nicely in that quilt. So I was very grateful to have discovered this Kaif as an artist and follow his direction. And then when I look back at it, this quilt, which is called Gridlock, was probably one of the turning points in my early development. Up until that point, I was just almost randomly picking fabrics and putting them together in the quilts. And then I saw this, and like the story behind it was that my son, my third and youngest son, had just started kindergarten, and while all the mothers were standing there crying and you know, filled with sorrow that their kids were going off to school, and I did feel that way, but I was slipping out the back door because it was the first day in 10 years that I had completely without children. And I was really excited that I could just go into my space and make a quilt. And this was the quilt that I made. So about 15 minutes ago, I remembered this quilt. So I climbed up into the attic to get it out to show you. And what was important about it was that and you can see now, like the myth of quilts being family heirlooms is really apparent when you see this, because it's threadbare and worn out and faded with time because it was on my son's bed for a very long time. But what Kaif taught me, or what I learned doing this quilt, was about using contrast and using it in ways that, oh look, there's even a hole there. I might have to patch that up. It's just completely perished. But it's about blending in spaces and creating stronger lines in other spaces. And as I was making this quilt, and I was really proud of the fact that I was making it entirely from my stash with things that I had to decide which fabrics would blend and which fabrics would contrast to make the different squares. And that was a revelation that has carried me through all the different kinds of quilts that I've done. I'm basically a piecer. I really love to sit at the machine and sew pieces of fabric together. But yeah, so anyway, that was where I started out. But then because I worked in a shop, and when I say work in a shop, what I mean is I open the door, I stand on the floor, and I talk to customers about quilting all day long. So I think this has been, actually, I'm going to move this because it's been in the attic and it's a little musty smelling. Besides, if I put any more quilts in here, I'm going to have to talk to you from the other room because it's very full of things that I might want to talk about. But anyway, let's go back to, we opened up the shop, and I was self-taught, and I quickly realized that most of my customers, if not all, knew a lot more about quilting than I did. So it was a give and take situation. Some of my customers taught me things, and then in turn, I would turn around and helped them, because I really have always appreciated the fact that as quilters, we all start somewhere as a beginner, and then we progress and we add layers and layers and layers of complexity to what we're doing. But a couple of things really struck me in those times. The first thing was the first collection that I got really excited about bringing into the shop was Amy Butler's first fabric collection. It was filled with bright, colorful flowers. And it said to me, okay, this is the direction that I want Material Obsession to go in. And then when I brought it and put it on the wall, people would walk in and they'd look at it and they'd be like, oh, what the heck is that? And you know, they didn't really understand this really almost drastic change in direction of fabric. So I quickly realized that I had to start working with these fabrics to educate my customers and show them how to use them. Not only were they colorful, they were white-based instead of traditional cream or bone. And sometimes they had big, large-scale prints and patterns. And because I'm standing there and talking to customers, you know, if one customer says something, you think, oh, that might be an issue for people. But if another one and another one and another one, and finally by the 100th, I might go, oh, ding, this is somebody, this is a problem that people might have. So I started designing quilts that addressed the issues and problems that I recognized my customers were having. And the other little funny story about that is that even though, like, oftentimes, you know, quilters pack or shop in packs and herds, and they'd come in together in a group, and somebody would say, oh no, these fabrics will never last. No one will ever want to quilt with these fabrics. And I'd be like, really? I think they're great. But then that group might leave, and a day or two later, somebody from that group would come back to the shop on their own, and they would want to investigate more thoroughly what was going on in there. And some of those customers, you know, if you're watching now, Melissa Moore, Vicki Hines, Kath Babbage, and many of my very good friends were people that walked in the door and thought, oh, wow, this is really a direction that I can embrace and go forward with. So I'm quite happy that I stuck to my guns and decided that bright and colorful was where I was going to go. And yeah, it's given me great joy. So let's see, where do I want to go from there? Let's just talk about that. So let's just talk about when we started getting in fabrics, and Carolyn Davis, who was has always worked at Material Obsession. She was actually the first person, she funded our first purchase of CAFE because it was quite expensive. I think in those days, this is 2004 or 5, CAFE facet fabric was $45 a meter, which was unheard of. We'd never seen anything that expensive. And Carolyn, in her wise wisdom, said, oh, well, we've got to have that. I'll buy the first collection for you. So we brought CAFE into the store. It sold, and it still sells today. It's a tried and true, happy piece of fabric that we can all relate to. So that being said, what happens when you use bright, colorful fabrics is creating a line might be a little bit more difficult than it is in a light, medium, and dark basis. So this is an example of using a lot of colorful fabrics against white. So when you put color against white and you consider the line, it's very obvious. And I think when you're first starting to work with color, having an obvious line gives you confidence, and it gives you certainty that you will be able to see the effort that you've put into your project. So this quilt is called Red Center. And it's a version of another quilt of mine called Fractured. So it's a one block wonder. And I think I made it about 10 years ago. And I remember putting it up on my design wall because that's how I work. I always design, cut fabric, put it on the design wall, and assess where the direction is going. So it starts in the center and it moves around all the way out to the outside. But the one thing that I learned when I started using these colorful fabrics is when you can't always determine the light, the medium, and the dark. So I was alternating warm and cool colors. And this is sort of one of the golden rules that you have to understand when you're using FreeSpirit fabrics, is that if you can't create with light and dark, then you can't create a line with light and dark, then you want to start dividing your fabrics into warm and cool. So you can see it sort of gives a bit of a jiggle to the quilt, where if I was to just put all the reds together, they would blend. So I'll keep talking about that as we go through all these different projects. But in the back of your mind, I want you to ask yourself, where's the line in these quilts? What am I seeing? What's the structure? Okay. So if you have any questions as we go, feel free to type them in, and Sharon will tell John, and John will tell me, and I'll answer them. How's that? This quilt's called Colorworks, and a lot of you, if you've done my classes as I've traveled around the United States or Australia, this is a really popular class. I wasn't ever really, well, let me tell you, I designed it. I'm blending into the
quilt.
Oh, and by the way, I'm styled by Kafe and Brandon today. They gave me this beautiful dress. I have to give them a little plug, thanks. And also, FreeSpirit, thank you for getting me up to date and actually dressed, because for the last 4 months, I've only ever been here at the shop or the grocery store. So this is very exciting to feel like I'm actually interacting with humans. So this is Colorworks. And I specifically, my intent in designing this quilt was to use large scale fabrics that have lots of colors. So polychromatic prints with big scales. So the first thing that I want to do is find a big space in the quilt so that the intent of the design actually shows through. So you can see all these great big flowers in these X's standing out and really making a statement. But for me, working with white was always a little bit too obvious. As a quilter, I really love to challenge the fabric selecting process to create something that is interesting. So I'm seeking interest, not obvious. Now, I realize that not everybody is in that position, that and for various reasons. I mean, I have a lot of experience putting quilts together. I haven't counted yet, but I know I have 45 quilts in my living room, and I have another like 20 up in the attic and all over the shop. So I think I've probably made maybe 400 quilts in the last almost 30 years. So I've exercised that decision-making process, which makes me really confident in doing it. It's just like bicep curls or whatever else you might do. The more often you do it, The more often you challenge yourself, the more confidence you get. So one thing I love to say to quilters is don't beat yourself up. If you don't feel confident, start basic. Start with the white. Then perhaps swap the white out and look for something else to create your line. And in this example, I used Marcia Dursey's tone on tone fabrics just as easily. That could be a batik or a shot cotton or any other thing that sort of sits quietly and subtly in the background. So one of the things I really love about this quilt, and that I think makes it effective, is the fact that the shot cotton stripes in these background pieces allow these bright, colorful fabrics to stand out quite vividly on that background. So you still see the lines quite clearly. And then, of course, one of my favorite things is stripes. The number of times a customer would walk into the shop and say, or say to their friend, don't buy stripes, they're hard to cut. Well, if you cut across a stripe, you get a really vibrant, exciting piece of fabric to use. And I've got a few examples. Oh, here's one. This is in my quilt called Making Quilts. And my book, what did I say, quilt? This is a very simple quilt to make, and it's very visually exciting. It was designed springing from, I'm a big fan of Gwen Marston and the books that she wrote because they were bedded in tradition. They gave us lots of really good, strong, geometric quilts. And oftentimes they were string pieced. So because I'm a little bit of a bull at a gate, and I might actually refer back to that later, I want to get busy really quickly. And I started looking at these quilts and thought, well, I can achieve that result if I use stripes. So these are just diamonds cut either along the stripe or across the stripe and assembled in diagonal straight rows. But I've always loved this quilt. I think it's very visually exciting. And it was using some of Kafe and Brandon's fantastic stripes and then offset with the spot on the side, which is another way to get contrast. So here I've got stripes, which are very graphic, and the spots, and you can clearly see the line in that border. If I wanted the border to disappear, I could have used more stripes.
Hey, Kathy, we have a question.
I don't know about
Gail?
you guys. A question?
Yeah, Gail
What is
Pape. Gail Pape is asking, what preparation is best for the shot cottons?
What preparation is best for the shot cottons?
The shot cottons. Well, oh, you mean because they can be a little bit stretchy, perhaps? Look, I've never done anything to the shot cottons. I just cut them, but I do cut carefully, and I use 2 rulers. When I go to the demonstration part, if I can, I'll demonstrate how to cut so that you get a nice straight line, because I learned a really great way from Marty Michelle with her ruler sets, and I'll demonstrate that later. John, you remind me. Good question. So this is another quilt that I made using stripes. And it was also fashioned off of, I think it was a New Zealand antique quilt. And it was string piece. And I just thought, well, I've got a few of those stripes left. I'll turn it into this. But I just loved how fabric is doing the work for me. Imagine how long it would take to string piece all of the pieces into this quilt. Just give me a second. I'll take this one down. Now, a lot of what I'm showing you today will chronicle sort of the development of and the different experiments and the different ways I approach the issues. This quilt is called Madness. It's in my book called Adding Layers. And it was, I had discovered Gee's Ben quilts and Anna Williams, and I just loved the chaos of those quilts and the fact that they just used what they had and they put it all together. So these were all the bits and pieces from under my sewing table. And I just started putting them up on the design wall and building a structure. But the important part about this, the teaching element of this quilt, is the use of black and white. Because when you're using lots of color, and you can see I've done the warm, cool throughout all the different individual pieces of this quilt, but the black and white in this quilt really gives structure to it. So without that black and white, it would be a bit of fabric soup. You would not see all the detail in there, but by creating those spaces within the quilt, you can see. it gives form and structure and makes it recognizable.
Glenda Parker is saying she's so glad to be able to see Kathy live.
Glenda Parker's happy to see you live.
What? Who is?
Glenda Parker.
Hi, Glenda. So this quilt is called Vintage Spin, and it's also in my book, Adding Layers. And I like to talk about this quilt because, first of all, it's using my favorite tool, which is the wedge. Usually you see a wedge and a Dresden plate in a circle. In this case, I've squared them off. And I called it Vintage Spin because as a quilter, I love to collect fabric. I have lots of it. And I found one day that I had this pile of fabrics that were vintage or they looked vintage. And every time I put one on that pile, I'd say, I'll use that someday. And one day I thought, well, let's make someday today. So I started cutting up all of these vintage fabrics in combinations and sewing them together. Now, what I think makes this quilt a success is the use of value. So value, light, medium, dark, is probably the first thing that we learn from every teacher, that you need to have a light, a medium, and a dark to build a block. So the combinations of these blocks are, in some cases, very dark and very light, or two mediums, or in some cases, like down here, John, look down there, I've got two lights. So even though there's no color story or theme to all the different elements of this quilt, you can see that it's still holding together, and that's because they're all picked because they're vintage. So that's just a little mind game that I play with myself, because matching is not a word in my vocabulary. My mom can attest to that. She used to tell me that my outfits didn't match, and I'd be like, what are you talking about? So for me, we just take that word matching, we throw it away, and we think about creating interest in the quilts. And also in this one, the structure is further reinforced again by sorry, the use of the black and white circle in the middle. Sorry.
That's okay. John, can
you
you
when I start coughing?
John, can you let Kathy know
So,
that there's a question from Sue
Another
Duval?
thing before I talk about mixing quilt elements.
Question from Sue Duval.
Hi, Sue.
How do you wash your quilts?
How do you wash your quilts?
What? Funny. So are you saying that because they look like they need a wash? A lot of times some of my quilts, like my bed quilts, the ones that we use and the family use, I used to put them in the bathtub with a bit of gentle soap and put the music on and just sort of dance around until the water was clear. And then I would hang them out on the veranda to dry. I just recently got a front-loading washing machine specifically because I think they're gentler on the quilt. I never liked the idea of putting it in the machine and having it wrung up and stretched out of shape. So yeah, I always imagined I was a winemaker.
There you go.
So this quilt this was a really, can you see this?
Yeah, if you hold it like that.
I suppose you can still hear me because I got the mic on. So this quilt, this was when sort of modern first started appearing on the horizon, and I really like the idea of playing with scale, and particularly because I like using what?
Just hold it still. You keep moving.
Oh, I like using the bigger scale prints. I was looking at a photograph of a traditional basket quilt, and they were 6-inch blocks, and I thought, oh, that's really gorgeous. I love that basket block. I'd love to make that, but I don't have time to make 6-inch blocks and make a quilt. And then I thought, oh, well, I could make it if it was 60 inches. So I then quickly started doing the math to figure out how to enlarge that block. So it wasn't enough to do a solid background. I thought that was just too easy. There was no challenge. So I went through my stash and picked all of my pretty little pale fabrics and pieced them together in 2-inch squares to make the background. That's one of my favorite quilts. I love talking about that one. And I won a prize. I think I won my first prize in a quilt show with that one. So that's really a lot about the piecing quilts, or the special ones that I wanted to talk about. But then I discovered applique. Now, when I say discovered applique, I, like maybe many of you, started out with applique and was very discouraged by the technique. And a lot of that is because applique is very much about preparation. So if I have to stop what I'm doing and prepare something, it slows down or it's a greater distance between my idea and the completion. And I like to keep that very compact. So when I discovered wash away applique paper, and that's what I'm going to demo in a minute or two, it changed my life because I could design and perform to a level that made my applique acceptable. I mean, I'm not embarrassed to say that I had people look over my shoulder and say, oh, look at your stitching. You're not supposed to be able to get your finger under that applique piece. Oh, I can see it there. I can see it there. Oh, you'll get better, honey. Like, I'm just like all of you. I've had people teach me how to do things. And in some cases, it was rather embarrassing. But fortunately, I'm very tenacious. And I just kept going back to it because simply for the reason that applique allows you to really embed your voice in your quilt. Piecing a quilt together is one thing, but when you can actually embed a message or show somebody what you feel or what you care about or what you love in your life, that's the treasure of it. That's the real important message. So whether I'm piecing a quilt or adding applique to it, I wanted to just give you a little bit of a message, because when I look at a quilt and I see, I wonder what she was thinking, I'm engaged and I'm interested. And that's always my motivation. So in this case, this is called Lovebirds because I love birds. And I was just playing around with some simple shapes. And in truth, because I'm a shop owner, I often have to show people or make samples or show people how to use the fabric that I choose to buy for the shop. So in this case, you can see a whole collection of K-facet spots. The colorful ones are used in the wedges to create that fan shape. And then the paler ones, the pastel ones, are used as the backgrounds for the applique. Now, let's talk about line again. In the applique blocks, I want to be able to see all of my shapes. I want to know what I'm looking at. So the line of the shapes against the background needs to be fairly strong. And I think that's why we used to always see applique done on quilter's muslin or white or, solid color fabrics. But bring in a little bit of texture and you create a lot more interest in what you're doing. The other place that we can see line is in these fans. So using the spots, well, I refer to spots as a graphic, having a graphic with a motif all throughout that whole thing. You can clearly see the lines in the wedges. Does that make sense? Anybody have a question about that?
I don't see any
Are you with
questions
me?
about that. We're
How
with
many
you.
of you are
We're
drinking
with you.
wine?
They should all be drinking wine.
So
you should
this
have
quilt is
mimosa.
called Lovebirds. It's in my book called Mixing Quilt Elements. And I call my books kind of funny names. Adding layers was about adding layers of understanding and depth to what you're working with. Mixing Quilt Elements was, I see people come in and they'll tell me that they're a piecer or they're applique or they're modern or they're an art quilter. But I really have enjoyed mixing all those elements of quilting into my story. So yeah, just breaking down those barriers and looking at things a little differently. What were you laughing about? I have one more piecing one.
I think she meant for me.
Huh? What? This one, I just grabbed this at the last minute too. I called this one House Party because if you are interested in this direction of using a lot of different colorful prints, here, I'm going to put this here so you can look at it from the top. Every block in here has 2 fabrics in it. And every single combination, I looked and looked and looked in my stash until I found one that made me want to dance. And that, to me, it's not enough to just go, oh, these 2 fabrics will do. I really want them to call out to each other, to create interest in every single junction. So this is another one of my personal favorites. It uses a lot of different kinds of fabrics, and it was also using one of Kaif's. This one had a whole bunch of different square print fabrics on it and flowers. But also, I might point out, when you do a quilt with a lot of color, this one is very intricately hand-pieced in a very traditional pattern. I'm not sure that I needed to go to that much effort in quilting that, but I did love it. Okay. So now let's get right down into the whole idea of adding applique. After having made all these quilts, piecing fabrics together, piece after piece after piece, I suddenly had this realization that if I can bring applique into my piecing structure, that's my personal stamp. That is something that really allows me to use my voice as a quilter. So one of the first quilts that I did for my book, Organic Appliqué, was this one. And what I love about it is we're using the color selecting process, cool colors moving across and the warm colors moving up, and then adding in that border. You know, typically a courthouse steps quilt would not have any applique, but I really loved building that applique into the structure of the quilt and having it come out and literally like overgrow those borders. And I did this to using some of this is from my Celebrate fabric collection with FreeSpirit fabrics. And I mixed it in with lots of other designers. I've got some gorgeous fish from Brandon Mabley and another one of Capes. And that was from the Celebrate collection as well. And this one's hand quilted. A lot of you are probably interested in the quilting, but okay. So behind that is my very embarrassing stash. So I liked that quilt so much that I made it twice. So this is the second time that I made it. So it's got the same structure, but this time I used a softer, sort of earthier palette. And instead of the spots in the border, I used stripes. So I guess the importance of that is understanding that when you look at a quilt and you like it, figuring out what it is that you like, and then what suitable substitute could you use? And a lot of the decisions and a lot of the quilts that I've made have been based on the fact that by the time we were getting fabric down here in Australia, it wasn't necessarily the same as what was trending in the magazine. So customers would come in and say, I want to make this quilt, but I couldn't get the fabric that was in it. So I had to figure out, well, what is that fabric actually doing? How is it performing in that quilt? And once I realize how it's performing, what do I have that will perform in the same way? And that's where standing in the shop day after day after day, making those decisions has taught me how to think of those suitable substitutes. And that's really the luckiest part about my experience. I want to show you one other one that is piece before we move to appliqué, right? This was a special project. One of my son's friends called him up and asked him if he could buy one of my quilts. So I took that opportunity during our isolation days to make a quilt for him. And in return, he's a painter and he's going to paint a picture. He's going to do a portrait of my son. So I love the idea that I didn't have to think about writing a pattern, although I used one of my existing patterns. I didn't have to think about being able to reproduce it or teach it. I just made it for fun. So this was a really exciting opportunity for me to play with my stash. I started out with a bit of hand-painted fabric from, I'll think of her name in a minute. And then I just went through my stash. But this is I would call this a very complicated fabric selection because I had very specific ideas about how I wanted the lines of the quilt to connect. So in some cases, it was the size of the graphic. In some cases, it was the value. In some cases, I wanted it to read almost like a tone on tone, or my version of a tone on tone. And then, so you get these two patterns. One, you get the star, Pat Pauley, that's her name. She's from Rochester. I bought that at Quilting by the Lake. And then you get that star pattern, and then you get that spider web pattern. So I think this was a great option for a young man. It's something that he can have. It's not quilted yet. You can see I foundation pieced that onto fabric. Okay, so let's move to the applique portion of the program. This is my book, Organic Appliqué, and if you're at all interested, I would recommend that you get this book. And the reason why is that I've designed several projects in here. That's the one I've just shown you, overgrown. And I wrote the patterns and gave you all the templates and talked about why I made the decisions that I made in each of the quilts. But then I went back, and in the beginning of the book, I talk about creating your voice and being brave. But then I went in and, where is it? I spent a lot of time verbalizing or writing about seeking interest, how you make the decisions about selecting your fabric, what you're looking for, where your contrast goes, where your contrast is, expanding your use of color, working with warm and cool colors, and just giving some language. So everything that I'm talking about today, I wrote down into this book. The idea is that if you want to make this quilt, your quilt doesn't have to look exactly like my quilt. I want to give you the tools so that you can make it yourself. You can, if you like it the way that it looks, you can make it exactly that way. But if you want to just experiment, you don't actually have to put the applique exactly where I put the applique. Because believe me, I love applique now, but there's no Baltimore in this girl's future. I want it to just go where it goes. So that organic idea, the fact that it grows based on what you're doing, that's a really positive thing. And it's quite empowering to take control of that creative direction yourself. I know it's a little bit scary for some people, but it really is just a matter of practice. I mean, I'm not going to do an applique, but this was one of our block of the months that we're running. We ran it last year and I did the sample, and we're running it again because it was so popular. So you can see this is the kind of quilt. It was a pattern by Irene Blank of Focus on Quilts. And it was hanging on the wall in the shop. And I used to walk by it and think, why doesn't anybody ever buy that? It's so beautiful. And then suddenly I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll do it as a block of the month. So it made me make it. And you can see in here, I've used lots of beautiful, there's Kay Fassett and Anna Maria Horner. Oh, and Kathy Doughty, Seeds and Stems. Lots of different colorful prints set on a gray and white stripe and gray linen. But it is a great example of taking something that's traditional and throwing color on it and making it just feel very now and very timely. I might pause for a commercial break and say, this was one of the quilts that I did with my latest collection, New Vintage, which I'm pleased to say appears to be making a lot of people happy. When I think about New Vintage, I feel like it's the collection I was born to make. I've been dreaming of a collection like this as long as I've been designing fabric, but it does take layers of understanding when you're designing. So as you go along, you learn every time you do a collection, you learn something more. And with this one, I really loved capturing that bird, and also then playing around with the idea of a jewelry box that a woman might have had in an older age. And the plaids, of course, my favorite theme, to have something with that kind of graphic energy. And this print came from this bag, which was a tapestry that I picked up in a op shop. And I drew the bird over the existing roses. And then Cave came to town and he started doing the background in this little corner. So in actual fact, it took me 3 years to finish this bag. But I looked at that and I took that bird and redrew it, and this was the beginning of this entire collection. But the reason I would show you this quilt is that when you have a great big scale print like that, it's a fantastic opportunity to fill the structure of some of our more basic quilts. So this one is based on an Amish bar quilt. So it's nothing but long strips of fabric. But when you look at it, it's entertaining. It's where one day we might have made this using solids. Right now, we've got this fantastic opportunity to really show off a piece of fabric that we love and to fill up the spaces in the quilt quite simply, but quite dramatically and with great interest. The other quilt that I made with New Vintage that I love is a completely different kind of a thing. This is my bird cage, which will be featured in Quilt Mania. This is an opportunity, or another opportunity, to use great big scale prints and then some of the more graphic prints to outline the shapes in the quilt. This one is a coverlet. Now, like many of the quilts in Australia, we have a strong English heritage here. I said we, didn't I? Because I'm Australian now. Well, dual citizenship. So this doesn't have any batting or wadding inside. It's just a coverlet. So it's a nice little summer throw. And it was also really quick to make using the 2-inch hexagons. Okay. Do you have any questions for me now before I move to? No questions. I must be a really good teacher then.
No, you are a good teacher. But if I could just jump in, John, for a couple of minutes here.
Oh, I'm getting the stop sign.
Okay. Yes, because I have to welcome our viewers. I would like to welcome everybody because Kathy's been doing such a wonderful job showing us all of her fantastic quilts. Welcome everybody. We are here today with Kathy Doughty. She's a FreeSpirit fabric designer, and she also owns a quilt shop in Australia called Material Obsession. If you haven't ever been to her website, you can go to materialobsession.com and look up any information that you're finding here, or send any questions to Kathy and let her know, anything that you saw today, if there's anything that you'd like to ask. You can send us some questions, and let me see, a lot of comments, Kathy, just saying that people like, they love the quilts, they love the stripes that you're using. Kathy, you're so amazing. There's been like a lot of really positive comments on here, but no one's asking any specific questions. Let me see, Marissa loves the coverlet for Houston summer. I do too. I think the coverlet's great. And Kathy, I really think that what you said earlier, as a quilter, when you said to like personalize a quilt with applique, I mean, that is just, you're 100% right. I mean, everybody can make a square, but it's not until you actually put your handwork into a piece does it truly take on a whole different meaning. And it's just so personal, not only with like the stitch lengths, but also the applique and everything else that you do. So anyways, I would like to welcome everybody, send thumbs up, hearts, send questions, I'll interrupt. I have to ask John to ask Kathy the questions, but he's more than happy to. And he's the man behind the lens, Kathy's husband, keeping an eye on everything. And John, just so that you know, the pictures are coming through very well on Facebook as far as I can see here.
Oh, great.
So yeah. Oh, Kathy, you're listening. So Kathy, yes, I was saying that just really a lot of positive feedback. People are saying, wow, they love your use of stripes, love that quilt. A lot of people are just saying a lot of positive things like that. And everybody's enjoying everything. Barbara Craxton is asking, how do you hand quilt the coverlets? We've got some
I didn't
Yay
hand quilt the
Johns.
coverlet.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Or how do you quilt them at all? What do you do?
Quilt any quilt or the coverlet?
The coverlet.
The coverlet's hand pieced onto big pieces of fabric, and I think that traditionally they might have tied it off, done little ties through it, or you could quilt it, but it doesn't. I think it would just require basic quilting just to stabilize it. But for me, I just pillow slipped it. I put the front and the back together, sewed around the outside, turned it inside out, and finished it off, and that was it. And I'm not having any dramas with it. I think it's really nice to handle.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Somebody asked
it's really,
earlier.
John's just telling me to look at the camera. It's almost, it's quite a bizarre situation to be talking to people when you can't see them.
I know. I feel the same way. I have to keep looking, remembering to look at.
I can't even see you.
Yeah. Oh, you can't?
Are there any other questions before I go to the next phase?
Well,
I don't want to keep them till midnight.
I know. The ladies are jumping ahead. They're asking about templates. I feel like they know something.
Oh, right. Well, I'm now going to move into the practical section. John, can you come and take the earbuds now? I'm going to move to the practical section and then show you about the templates. Okay.
So we'll go back to you. Yep.
Okay. All right. Okay. I think that so far I've covered a lot about the contrast in looking at the quilts, but when you actually turn around to your project, how do you approach that? So I've just got a couple of things, and these are all straight out of the book. For example, this is just a demonstration of going through my stash in the traditional way of picking fabrics for a project and picking a light, a medium, and a dark. And you can clearly see the lines between your light and your medium dark. So if I was piecing those together, I know I would be able to create the line for the structure in the block. So when I'm starting a project, I often will just pull out a bunch of fabrics. Now, I was planning to do this for you, but I didn't actually get to it. But I could really randomly just say, okay, if I'm going to break it down into cool fabrics and warm fabrics, I then want to further make sure that I have a composite of light, medium, and dark. So I'll pick my fabrics and do a value scale. Now, a value scale doesn't mean anything to you. That's okay. It's actually not a natural thing for people to understand. If you ever studied color, Joseph Albers said 80% of people don't understand value. But it is something you can teach yourself. It's about how much lightness there is in a fabric. So if you have something that feels heavy and dark, it goes at the back. And as you come forward, it's going to get lighter because light things jump out. So you can see that spot is jumping out more than any other piece on here. So it's going to end up at the bottom. And the same thing in the warm pile. Now, I didn't pick super obvious choices here, but I did work it from warm to cool. So I want to know when I start a project that I've collected fabrics that will exercise this whole value and warm and cool kind of an idea, so that I'm going to have interest embedded in the fabrics in my quilt. So for example, when I was making Overgrown, these were some of the fabric options that I might have had on that day. So you can see I've got a light, and I'll just say, when I look at the fabrics, I look at them and I think, okay, that's sort of a motif driven graphic. This being a plaid is definitely a graphic. So that will definitely contrast over a motif driven print. Another motif print, another plaid, another motif. Oh, that's one of my early ones. That's sort of a decorative graphic. Paisley would be a motif. And that is as close to a solid as I might get with a tiny little graphic on it. But you can see there's a lot of diversity in the kinds of fabrics in there. And that will then turn out to make a quilt that has interest embedded in it as well. So, and that's the same in the cool. And you can see it bounces back and forth. You can clearly see the line between that graphic and that motif and that motif and that stripe, right? So that's language that you can embed into your process, so that you never have to say to anybody, I'm no good at color. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so say for example, I just grabbed these. I'm just going to grab a stack out of here. Whoops. Nope, I'm just going to throw them all on the floor. Okay, here's some piles of fabric. So if I was planning to start a quilt, I would look at this and I would want to create order. So I'm going to say, okay, it's a dark, cool print. That's a dark, graphic, cool print. This is a dark, spotty graphic print, and I'm going to put them in the pile, and I'm going to keep doing that, and I'm going to keep positioning them so that the lightest ones are at the end and the darkest ones are at the top. Now you can see how quickly I'm doing this. I'm very well versed in it. I do it all the time, but this shouldn't take a whole day unless you're enjoying it. If you get satisfaction out of doing that, you can continue playing around. Now, the first thing that I'm going to notice is that this one doesn't go all the way to a light. So I might keep adding at the light end. And what's interesting about this, and I do this in my classes and my workshops all the time, this pile looks really interesting to me. If I take away that part of the pile, or maybe even all the way to that pile, it still has interest, but it's not as interesting as if I go all the way to a full light. Okay? So that's just a really quick organizational tip. Now I'm gonna call that an organizational tip, but I'm also gonna say that it doesn't stay like that very long. It does get messed up, but I know if I do that one check at the start, that I've got a good basis for my quilt, and I also know what I'm missing. So I like to talk about that because I see you all when you're shopping, and I know, and if you've done my workshops, you know I say this to everyone. If you like something, you gravitate toward it, you collect it. But chances are you've already collected enough of that, and it's time to look at the things that make that the hero. Anybody, you understand that?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Even you understand.
I'm
John
learning.
Meckens, you could my lecture, he's heard it so many times. Okay, so this is actually an example. This is something I've started but haven't progressed very far. This is the beginning of my fractured quilt, and you can see I've used all those different elements of, you know, sometimes it's dark and light, sometimes it's motif, and sometimes it's stripe. Okay, let's go to the demo section. So
Hey, John,
This is the wash away.
Yep.
before Kathy,
Question?
can you give her the earbud again? Because there's
Yep.
some questions that people are asking.
Wait, hold on.
That's it. No, no,
I can't reach it.
No, no, no.
Yes.
Hi there. Hi there.
Hey. Hi.
All right, so there's a few questions that are coming through. My colleague Lindsay has been so kind to send some of them because I can only see 3 at the time. So
Oh, okay.
someone asked, all right, about the quilt coverlet. You answered that. What was the pattern? We've got a couple of questions here. What was the name of the pattern that you made for your son's friend again?
Oh, it's not exactly the same, but it's from Pop Stars, which was in Material Obsession 2, which is no longer in print. But if you're interested in that pattern, we can put it up on the website. Just
Okay.
email me. And I will, after this, go back and look at all the questions on the Facebook page and answer anything that I can.
Okay.
So if we don't get to their questions right now, because are we running out of time?
Well, we can go as long as we want. I don't know what time you have to leave because you have a shop to open, right?
Oh, no, I got somebody to work for me. Let me just move that around a
Oh,
little bit.
okay.
I'm gonna move.
Okay. So,
But well, hold on, a couple more questions. So what software do you use for designing patterns? Do you work on one quilt at the time? Do you work with software or paper and pencil? And do you choose the fabric when designing a quilt? Does she have the fabric chosen when designing a quilt?
okay, so let me just go back. I don't use any software. I design on my design wall. I cut and position on the design wall. I'm constantly working like that. So very practically, and then I go back and I write the patterns. I'm currently talking to the people at EQA to see if perhaps I could get some software, because now that I design fabric, I need to be able to produce those quilts much more quickly. And doing it on a computer would actually, it does 2 things. Doing it on the computer actually allows you to see where you're going before you get there, which I've done that a few times. I work with a graphic designer and she helps me with that, an Illustrator. But I need to access that system more quickly, because if you know where you're going, it eliminates a lot of the questions and problems that you might have. I mean, right, so that's that question. I'm looking at software now, but design practically. Now, as far as picking fabrics for my projects, sometimes I pick them because, again, I work in a shop every day, and so something might come in and I want to use it. I might buy something that I think is a little bit challenging for the majority of my customers, so I want to demonstrate how that can be used. I might want to just make a quilt because I'm in love with fabric, or like many of you, and I don't get to do this enough, but I would really like to be able to make quilts for, like, my kids are getting to the marrying age. Someday they might get married, but some of their friends are. So that might be a message or a ceremonial acknowledgement kind of quilt as well. Did I answer all of those questions?
Yes, I think you did answer them all so far.
Yeah, so
but
sometimes you just need to make too. So that would be when I would just like pull from my stash and make things. So it depends on how engaged you want to be in that process.
There's a question that came through. Do you have any online classes?
We're looking at that now. Because I mean, isolation has taught us a lot of things. It's taught us that we're not just a brick and mortar shop, that we're an online shop, and we're working every day to make sure that what we do in our creative classroom setting, that what we do when we are talking designer to designer, like I work with a lot of really talented other quilters, Wendy Williams for one, she works with wool felt, and we do a lot on the floor of the shop, and we've suddenly realized that we're very limited by only being a brick and mortar. So we're looking at as many ways as possible to take that online. So if Sharon hasn't told you already, you can visit the Material Obsession website and see what kinds of kits and projects we have, keeping in mind that most of the time with our kits, they're bespoke. So when you order an overgrown quilt, I'm actually going to pick the fabric for that quilt for you. So I hope I don't get 6,000 orders for that this afternoon. But that's really what happens. I mean, I look at that and I do, if I have the original fabric, that's great. But if I don't, I just go through and I think, well, these fabrics would make a great quilt. And most of the time it's, oh my God, I wish I was making this quilt myself, because like every time the fabric rejuvenates in the shop, and we do turn through it really quickly, you have to make new decisions and decide where you're going to go.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of people that are commenting that they'd like online classes. So.
Oh, great. Well, look, I'd love to be doing them. It's one of my, I keep saying to John every day, but because of isolation, you have to understand that it's John and I and one other gal working in the shop, or now we've got 2 people coming and going. So it's quite time consuming getting all the orders out every day, but we are working toward online shop or online classes and lectures as well. So yeah, so I'm looking forward to that too.
Yeah.
Any other questions before I start talking about Appliqué?
No, I want you to talk about Appliqué. I want to learn some
Okay.
more.
Okay, so with the Appliqué, I might keep the headphones on for this because if then,
Move the camera.
okay, all right, I got to hand these back. So
I'll let you know.
talk loud. Okay. With Appliqué, as I said before, it's all about the preparation. Now, I find I get in moods when I'm sewing. So if I'm going to do an Appliqué quilt and I'm in the mood to create,
Not just when you're sewing.
what? I'm in the mood. I've lost what I was going to say. So
Yeah.
I'm really impatient. That's what John's alluding to. When I want something, I want it now. So like actually digging in and using freezer paper or making templates and all that with the applique, it was just too slow for me. But when I discovered this paper, here in Australia, we sell a product called Polyfuse. C&T makes a product called Appliqué washaway paper. There's a couple of different manufacturers of these products out there, but to me, this is a miracle because what it allows me to do is draw, print, or trace a pattern onto this paper. And once it's done, once it's traced, I can cut it out, iron it onto the back of, iron it onto the back of a piece of fabric, and then turn the edges over and glue it onto the paper. So I now have a finished piece of prepped fabric that I can work with. Now, the importance of this is for twofold. One, from a design perspective, now that this applique is finished, I can see exactly the impact that it's going to have on the quilt. When I put this on my background, I will know exactly what it's going to look like, where if it still had the seam allowance, it wouldn't be exactly the same amount of impact, if you understand what I mean. Once you fold the edges back, you get a really tight picture of what it is. With seam allowance, things will overlap and it could turn out differently than you anticipate. So from a composition standpoint, this is really important. But technically, what's really fabulous about this is I now have a smooth, finished edge so that when I go to stitch this down onto my background, get this, ladies, it's no harder than doing a binding. Every quilter has put binding on a quilt. So I'm going to sew through that folded edge and my background, and eventually it will be sewn down, but it's just using a binding stitch. So once I figured that out, I thought, oh, this is very simple. This is something that I can achieve easily. So the other thing that I like about it, and this is, well, John's showing you, this is our, this is something I'm really actually quite proud of. I designed this quilt this year to celebrate 30 years of marriage to John and 30 years of living in Australia. So this has a very personal message for me. It also relates to that commemorative element of making quilts that we're familiar with. This is John and I. He used to dance with me, but now he won't dance anymore, sad to say. And this is our home here in Australia. These little seeds are my 3 kids. This boat is for me, ships crossing the sea is very symbolic. And I quite love the idea that, I've migrated to another country. I came on a boat, or I didn't come on a boat, but somebody would have. Anyway, this is our block of the month, our anniversary block of the month. And it's using the templates that I've designed that I'm going to show you. So let's go back to this. Come over here. I get to tell John what to do. So with this paper, you can see that I've cut a hole out. So that would be a leaf. I've also repeated that shape here so I can continue. I would just fold that in half. I'm a little bit
Too much coffee?
Yeah, too much coffee. Okay, so I've cut out what I would call a leaf shape here, and I've just done that very organically. And see how this got these little dings? I don't want those there because the line of this paper is going to be the finished shape of this leaf. So I don't want to have those little sharp edges, okay? And here what I've done, this is left over from a previous project. I sewed together several different values of green. And what I like about this, and this also relates back to that whole mixing quilt elements story. When I learned how to do art quilts, I learned about positioning value and making something look realistic. So if you look out the window at the trees, you're going to see the spots where the sun hits, and you're going to see the spots where the shade hits. So having a variety of different colors allows you to subtly embed the idea of reality, that these things aren't a flat, solid green shape. And also that this then relates back to selecting your fabrics, because if I'm going to start an applique project, what I want to do, I know I'm going to have leaves. So I want a bright and sunny leaf with a little picture on it. That's a stripe, another stripe, and you can see they're gradually getting darker. And in some cases, they're bringing in other colors. That's not just green. It's also got some beautiful lavender in there and some browns. And that to me is a very realistic kind of a leaf color. Here we have some warm and cool embedded in that particular piece. So you can see they're getting stronger. Some are graphic, some are motif. That's one of my horizon prints, which I think is great for leaves. This is an Aboriginal print. It's an old Czech, an African print, another African print. So the idea is that here I've got lots of different colors that will be leaves. And in this case, I've gone through fabrics that, to me, if I look at that and I think that looks like bark or stems, I'm going to put that in my stem pile. So these are all different options that I would have to use in my quilt for leaves and stems. In this case, I just sewed those strips together. And as you can see on the back, I've cut out a whole bunch of leaf shapes, and I've ironed them onto the back of this, of those different colors of fabric, so that when I cut them out, I'm going to cut them out with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you can see I'm just doing that. I'm just cutting into it because I'm confident with that. But if you're not, you can just draw a 1/4 inch line outside the edge of the paper and cut your leaf shape. Oops. It doesn't matter what size that is, as long as I have enough to fold over. And I'll show you with this one. I'll just take my glue stick, rub it on the paper, and then I'm going to pinch it from the left side and then the right side, and then just work all the way around that edge until that's folded over and a complete smooth leaf shape. Now, if you haven't done a lot of applique before, doing it like this or using a leaf shape is a really good way to start. You could just do a whole collection of leaf shapes. Also, see these little bits at the end? I'm not going to worry about them right now, because that is something that when I'm sewing, I'm going to sew up to that point. I'm going to use my needle and tuck that underneath. And I'll do a little stay stitch on the point and then come down the other side. But you can see now, having those prepped. So that was allowing for the different colors. You can see now here, when I go to position this in my quilt, I want to keep in mind that my light source is coming from this way and keep that on the top part. Right? So if I continued to cut all these out, I would have a collection of these that I could position, keeping in mind where the light is coming from. And I'm just going to quickly cut this one out so that you can see what I'm talking about the difference between having your seam allowance and not having your seam allowance. So this one still has a seam allowance there. So it's a bit bigger, and it will look different when the edges are finished. In this particular instance, it's not going to look a lot different, but that's just to demonstrate the point. Okay. So the two things, the takeaways there is really work your color group and your texture when you're looking for your applique shapes, and start simple. I mean, I really started to enjoy applique when I realized that if I cut a nice smooth shape, I didn't have to worry about those indent seams or those really complicated layerings of things. And I think that it's quite fun. These are all pieces that I've prepared earlier. And this is the other thing that I like to do. I like to, if I'm going to be making stems, like the technique for making the stems is in the book, but if I'm going to make stems, I'm going to make a whole bunch at one time, so that when I'm composing and I'm moving really quickly, I have choices that I can choose from to compose. And I'll show you that in a second too. Hey, Sharon, any questions so far?
Well, Nancy is answering a lot of questions on behalf of Free Spirit and some of the other ones that she can't answer. There have been some questions about the glue stick and what do you use? Somebody likes the
Question about
blue
the glue stick.
scissors.
Oh yeah, what about it?
The blue scissors. What is the blue
Oh,
stick? The blue scissors?
These, everybody loves product. These are Karen K. Buckley perfect scissors, and they are perfect. They have a nice little serrated edge on the inside, and they have a very sharp point, so that when you are using them for applique and you're cutting, they're just perfect. The name, that's how you can remember them, perfect scissors. They never wear out because they're serrated, and you can get right into the, if you're cutting, say you are cutting into these little points here, you can get right in because it's sharp to the tip. The glue stick, these are readily available in almost any shop. They're, they have a, what do you call it? You buy the stick, but then you can get refills of the glue. But I also recommend that you do find a fabric glue stick. I see a lot of people using the ones from, you know, their kids' school boxes. And I'm not sure that that's not going to damage the fabric. It's a temporary glue stick. You know, I'll use this if I'm positioning something because it's not going to hold it to the fabric forever. I mean, there was a time when we all used little bottles of glue, and here's another lucky thing about being a shop owner. When I see somebody come in with an applique quilt and it's got dots of glue all over it, you know, it doesn't always wash out. So the only time I would use, I have one here somewhere, but the only time that I would use the liquid glue is if I had multiple layers so that it absorbs the fabric, or it absorbs the glue without leaving the dots on. Yeah.
It's
So I love these. I love
the
these little accordion
polyfuse
bottles. So if I was using a stem, or if I was making a stem, yeah.
Question coming in.
Yeah.
Is polyfuse the same as Misty Fuse or Steam-A-Seam?
Is that the same as Misty Fuse or Steam-A-Seam?
No, it's not the same. Misty Fuse and Seam-A-Steam don't dissolve, to my knowledge. Misty Fuse, maybe. I'm not as familiar with that product.
The product from C&T that's
It's wash away applique paper.
Wash
What
away.
you want to find is a water soluble paper. And the wash away from C&T, you can get it in A4, and I think you can get it on the roll as well, or you used to be able to get it on the roll. But both of those products, and I think Alex Anderson might make some as well. I mean, it's pretty common now. Some people use it for hexagons as well. But it comes, you know, let's just talk about this for a second. So the only things that you really need to know about this when you're using it is, like you can see here, I've just drawn these basic leaf shapes on there. But then if I was using something, if I wanted to fussy cut something, and I've cut that shape out of the paper, I'll get them in a minute. I'm going to do that next. I can see, I've got a viewing template is what I'm trying to say. I'm getting a little advice from my cameraman, which is always confusing. So you can see I can move that around the fabric, and I'll know that when I go to take that shape and glue it on the back, I'll know what it's going to look like. So anything in your process that takes you closer to the end of, or to your finished project that you can embed in your process, that's a good thing. Okay. Like for example, I'll just do this bird. Okay, so let's talk about my little templates. Oh, the other thing I was going to say about this is sometimes if you're going to be doing something if you're going to be cutting a lot of shapes, I might draw them on here and then fold my sheet up and use some of these, just hold that together and then cut out multiple shapes at a time. I've got that under control. Okay, I'm going to. Okay, so I wrote my book, Organic Applique. I start teaching it. I'm showing you all these different steps for making stems and creating interest and picking your fabrics. I start teaching, and what happens? People say to me, oh, will you draw that for me? I'm not comfortable drawing. And after a few times, you know, maybe 100, I thought, oh, this is something people have issues with. So whenever I hear that somebody has a problem, I want to solve it for them. And so I designed these, what I've referred to as organic design templates. They're made out of Mylar, which is a product that can be pressed. We've all seen perfect circles for making perfect circles. So this is the same material. And what it means is I can use this This is a more traditional way to make a template. So I've used the Mylar shape and I cut the fabric out and I use my glue stick, and now I can just press that and it's ready to go. So this is a method if you don't want to use the paper for some reason or you can't find it. This is another thing that you can do. I can create my shape using these Mylar templates. But when I made them, what I wanted to do was make them really interchangeable and also to play with scale, because I think using a variety of different scales is a really good way to add interest into your project. So there's there's three bird shapes, and then I've got sort of a leaf shape in 3 different sizes. But guess what? That leaf shape could also be a wing, or it could be a tail, or it could be a multi-layered tail, or that leaf could be a flower with another leaf, or that could be a wing, or it could be a tail. And so what we did was we drew a couple of examples of all the different shapes that you can make using those templates. So you can see the bird with some leaf shapes, you can see the tulip flowers, you can see the wing, all those different things. And I just can't tell you how excited I am about this, because it gives you the ability to use these shapes, but to personalize them and to create some sort of a design all your own. As of this morning, I found out that these templates, I mean, of course, we sell them on our website, but they're also now going to be available through Paper Pieces in the United States. So if you do Appliqué and hexagons, I'm sure you're familiar with them. They have a website and they're online, and they'll be selling these products. And I believe we have them for a giveaway today as well. So they're called Creative Appliqué Templates. This is the springtime set, and I'm already thinking of a variety of different themes for other sets to come in the future. But first, we'll just have these. So I don't know if you have any questions about that. I can go through it, but I'll just show you a couple of things that I've done and a couple of the possibilities with the pieces that I prepped, and then you can ask me more questions. One thing I have realized with these is you can see I've got these little dinner plates, and I quite like keeping all my templates in that, because I'm going to use them and then use a different one. So I want them all to be sort of in one spot so they don't get lost in my studio space, because I am just a little bit messy. And I know you know that because you follow me on Instagram, and everybody commented when I showed my messy studio. Also, here's another little thing. I like to combine products that help with composition and design, as well as with technique. And this is a little sneak preview. I was working on some of my upcoming collection, and I wanted to embed some applique. So I photocopied the fabric and then used that with the templates to see how I might like to use the fabric. So it then occurred to me that for you at home, photocopying fabric, your most precious piece of fabric you don't want to waste, photocopying it and using the paper to design is a really good way to go. So that's a free little tip for you right there. I just cut them out and put them on there. But also, if I want to design something and I'm looking at my blank slate, I can use these templates because they're the finished size and create my layout.
Use a text or something.
No, it doesn't matter. I'm just gonna.
Just so we can see it.
Oh, you can't see the pencil?
We can see it.
You can see it? Whoops. Uh-oh. It's falling apart. Typical studio. So you can see, so then maybe I might want to put another leaf over here or over here. But the point is that, as I said before, anything that you can embed in your process to get you closer to the finished product is a good thing. So you could use these. Maybe I'll have a stem like this, and maybe I'll have another one over here, and so on. But that's just the point of that. Okay. So you compose your layout. We just got this beautiful, somebody asked before how I start a project. Well, this beautiful piece of William Morris fabric from FreeSpirit just came in the other day, and I thought, oh, wow, isn't that a beautiful background? And wouldn't it look great with some of these shapes on it? So I've used a little bit of, well, here, let's put a little Brandon Mabley. See, and this fabric is one of Brandon's, and it's got fish on it, but it really offers up a great opportunity to play around with what the fabric has to offer you. And like, for example, this one, this is a heraldic, this is a K fabric. And what I really like about this is that, oh, here they are. I was looking for all my little pieces. This fabric gives you lots of different graphic elements, you know, a zigzag here and a stripe and that crazy zigzag. So you get a lot of different kinds of pieces from one piece of fabric. Like here's a little tulip. Here's a little, maybe make that a cap for the bird. Anna Maria Horner's, this is one of hers where it's got all these little jagged bookend kinds of things in there. Oh, I'm all over the map. Are you keeping up with me here?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah. So you can see, you could capture.
A little bit closer to me. Bring that a little bit closer to the camera. Like this. Yeah. That's it.
Okay, so let's just do. So now I made a little bit of a stem with this gorgeous brownie plaid, which I think is a stem color.
It actually looks like a smiley face on the back of the camera.
What does?
What you're making.
Oh, does it? So this is just, well, I'm in the creative process now. This is how it happens, people. I've completely lost you. I'm absorbed in what I'm doing. I'm losing time being creative here.
We love it.
So maybe you
going.
decide that something goes in your project, and maybe you decide that, oh no, that doesn't actually go. Well, then that just means you've got more pieces made up for the next time you go, next time you start a project. You getting the idea, Sharon? How are they going? Any questions now?
I love it.
They love it. So
Yes.
you can see, you get the point, right?
Yes,
Here's Anna's
it's
gorgeous
gorgeous.
little. Anyway. So that's pretty fun, isn't it?
It's awesome. John, can you give Kathy back the headphones again? Sorry.
Okay. So the templates are fantastic for composition, for designing, for technique. They offer you lots. They take you really close to where, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Are you talking, Sharon? Oh, okay, good.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So just going back now, the tips for the applique and a lot of the different projects are in my book, Organic Appliqué, or some of the older books that I've showed you quilts from, Adding Layers. This is just what the covers look like if you see them in your local quilt shop or wherever you get your books, and Mixing Quilt Elements. And anything that you see here, if you're interested in it or you have questions, you can always email me through the website, but visit our website, have a look around, familiarize yourself with what we're doing. And you can always also follow me on Matt Obbs Girl. And yeah, John's just reminding me, we also have a newsletter that we, I mean, I like to think of it as from my heart to yours. Whatever I see happening in the shop and I want to share that with people, we try to write that into our newsletters so that, I mean, sometimes it's because we have stuff we want to sell you, but sometimes it's just that there's something that's really creative that's happening and I want to draw your attention to it so that you can be inspired as well. So I'm sure that I have more things that I could tell you, but it's getting to be about that time.
Yes.
Way past that time.
That's okay. We've loved this opportunity with you today, Kathy. So thank you so much. And I mean, I don't even really know how to recap. I mean, you've taught so much in this short span of time. It's amazing. So thank you for everything that you've shared.
Thank you. But one thing I have to say, I'm a quilter because I love quilting, not just quilting, but the community of quilting. And I think that embedded in that process is sharing what we have to offer. And I love that, you know, everybody brings something different to the table.
Yes, I totally agree. Yeah. And we always learn from one another. I mean, there's always something to be learned, you know, it's just amazing. Like everything that you've put together and the colors and the fabrics and the textures and the depth that you bring to your quilts is just really amazing. And to have a peek into your world today has been really wonderful.
Well, I'm just going to turn around and say thank you to FreeSpirit for providing me with the most fantastic tools to work with. I have forever been inspired by FreeSpirit, by the fabric options that are there, by the freedom and the expression. I mean, FreeSpirit is such a great name to, you know, it's just exactly what it embodies. We're not fearful. We're going to be proud of what we want to make, and we're going to go forth. And if we like it, that's okay.
Totally agree. Totally agree. So, Kathy, like I said, I don't know how to quite wrap up properly with you, because there's just been so much other than just give you a huge thank you. I mean, it's been fantastic.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, you've been fantastic. And hopefully, you know, when your next line, you know, comes out, maybe we could have you on again and you could show us some more tips. A lot of the viewers are saying what a great inspiration you've been. It's been amazing. They feel so lucky to have been with you tonight or this morning, whichever it is, for wherever people are viewing. And a lot of people earlier, when you brought out your applique templates, were loving them, and they're calling you a genius and everything else. So
thank you, because genius is my preferred nickname. I love it when people think I'm a genius, because most people I'm surrounded by think I'm a bit of a goofball. But yeah,
no, those templates are awesome. I mean, I was watching you do them, and you make them look so simple on top of it. So,
but they are simple. That's the whole point. Let's get right down to it. We want to get to the finished product as fast as possible. So as soon as I figure out a way to do that, I'm going to share it with you.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's been fantastic. So I will have a look at the Facebook page and answer the questions. And yeah, it's been an absolute honor to spend this time with all of you, especially after having been alone for 3 months, or almost alone for 3 months. I've really enjoyed your company. Yeah, chopped liver.
Uh-oh, we just lost Kathy. It looks like wait. Yep, there she is. She's back.
Yeah, we're running out of battery. But anyway,
okay. Well, we're going to have to go. Okay, so let me just say that in order to win a prize today, we have a prize. Kathy, could you show the book one more time? Because I don't have a copy of that book.
Organic Appliqué.
Right. So for today's
take control of your own design inspiration.
That's right. So we're going to give a copy of the Organic Appliqué book. I have a bundle of Kathy's back quarters from her most recent line, New Vintage.
New Vintage.
I should have pulled it out, but you can see it behind me on the quilt as well. We're going to send that, and Paper Pieces is going to send a bundle of the new applique templates. So that winner is going to get a great jackpot. I'd like to be the winner, but I can't be. So for the question for today, it's a two-part question. So what we'd like to know is if you can tell us how many collections that Kathy Doughty has, fabric collections Kathy Doughty has designed.
Don't say one.
Right, and don't say one, it's not one. So how many fabric collections has Kathy designed with FreeSpirit since she started designing with us? And we've already asked if they would take a class with you, and many people have said that they absolutely would. And maybe we should just throw in another question of, you said, how many quilts did Kathy say that she thinks she made? So answer those questions. We'll pick a winner. Sarah, on our end, she always picks the winner, and they will be getting a wonderful gift of the book, the fabric, and the brand new templates. And Kathy, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us today. It's been fantastic. If our viewers have any questions. But
there is a price. There is a price for me sharing this. I really want to see, tag me when you do something with my stuff. If you make a quilt from my book, or you make something from the templates, make sure you tag me at Matt Obbs Girl or at Material Obsession. We have 2 different Instagrams and Facebook. So the Material Obsession is basically from the shop, and Material Obsession or Matt Obbs Girl is my personal voice. So you might see my kids there sometime. Yeah.
Well,
thanks, Sharon. You've been fantastic.
That's not a high price to pay, Kathy. So thank you to all of our viewers. If you have any questions, again, reach out to materialobsession.com, come to freespiritfabrics.com. And again, Kathy, thank you so much. And we hope to have you back again soon. So you and John have a great day, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you.
Just bottoms up, ladies.
Yeah, bottoms up. Bye-bye.
Thank you.